Hi, this is Emily from Emily's Stamping Grounds. I wanted to show you today how I made a couple cards using the special delivery set from Fawn and a few other sets and dies from Fawn as well. If you want to skip the coloring, I think I'm done around the 4-minute mark, 4.5-minute mark, something like that. You can skip ahead. So I colored a whole bunch of these conversation candy hearts from the How You Bean add-on set with all shades of red and a few red violets. Sorry, that went by really fast, but I was showing you that I used R39 and R37 for a few of these darker hearts. And then I used a lot of R's and I think R39, R37, R14, R22, R21, R24, R05, anything to get kind of peachy or red color for these conversation hearts in my color palette. I think I also, maybe on the finished one, used some R69 and RV19 together as a blend to have a kind of red violet heart as well, a darker one. I used a lot of RV19 and RV69 on the owl's hat and his little messenger bag, which you'll see later too. The ones you see me coloring here end up being my trial run of the version of the card. The pull tab mechanism didn't work so well on my first version, so I colored all these and then used them on that trial piece, and it didn't work so well. So my owl ends up a different color on the final version and everything, but at least you see what's going on, how I colored them. I used the same kind of color combos here. I believe this is the R69, R19 color combo, and then I might have added a little RV66, I'm sorry, in there, or RV09 to blend the two together, I think. For his hat and his messenger bag, I think I did that on both. And then the peach combos are R22 and R21 for the envelopes. And then I need to look up the colors for the wings and the owl that I used, but pretty sure I used R30 or E34 and E21, but I will make sure to add that in the description on my blog so you can see that. Excuse the little jump there in the video. I edited something out a little fast, I guess. I used some yellows for the beak, probably R15 and R19 for the beak, or I'm sorry, I keep saying R. Y19 and Y15 for the beak and the feet, and maybe a little E42 and E40 for the body of the owl. I tend to like that combination to get kind of a brown-gray color. We'll finish up with the coloring here in a second. Doing the messenger bag, whose die I seem to have lost somewhere along the way, so I had to cut this piece out by hand, which I always hate doing. I am not a fan of fussy cutting. But that is all the pieces. And then for the conversation hearts and this, I show it as stamping with the block and adding all the hearts in, but I kind of had a lot of trouble making this happen. I wasn't always getting a clean impression. I was having to go back in and try to, get over the top of it and line it back up if I missed the letters. So for the version I did on the final card, I put that cutout piece, or maybe even the non die cut piece back into my MISTI, and I placed all those little word parts of the conversation heart back on the MISTI, lined up with the hearts where I wanted, and then I stamped it all down at the same time, and so the impression was much better on those. I would recommend that rather than what I showed in the video. So I die cut out all the little bits and pieces for the owl, and here I was, though I pulled it off camera, I kind of cut a little wonky on the hat, so I was neatening that up. And then with a pair of scissors, drawing some white lines in. I think on my final version, I did not put those white lines in except on the conversation hearts rather than the owl itself. But here you can see all the parts and pieces that I die cut, lots of little letters and everything. And then for this part, I used the special delivery add-on set, which is the box, but I just used the little strings to carry. I wanted to make it look like those conversation hearts were almost like balloons being carried by him with all those sayings on it. So I just stamped that in black and die cut it out with my Gemini Junior and used it as the strings to hold all the conversation hearts. Now on this one, you're going to notice that I used the piece that's included in the special delivery die set to cut out his beak. On the final one, I just decided I didn't need to add that extra step and just glued it to the top of the owl instead. My little prototype I made was definitely a bit of trial and error. I had some problems with the pull tab portion and learned some lessons from it. So I wanted the clouds darker on the background. So it was better that I just started over again and made a few changes on my second go round. So here I'm cut out the card base, and I cut out with a Mama Elephant set the stitched background die that is 4 1/4 by 5 1/2, stitched rectangle die, and then the pieces on the left there, not the die cut pieces to the owl, but the pieces to the pull tab die, the waving pull tab die, are there. I cut out 2 stabilizer pieces. The main mechanism there is that long piece with the 2 little arms that stick out the side, and then it cuts a hole in the middle of the die, which I think you can't really see on screen. Here I used my favorite things cloud die, or a cloud stencil, with some passion fruit ink from Pink Fresh Studios and a blending brush to make my clouds, and I rotated and flipped and moved around my cloud stencil to get them to look all nice and fluffy in different sizes. And as you have seen quite a few people do, I am sure. I ended up being really happy with how the passion fruit die, or passion fruit ink, looked on that peach colored cardstock that I used. And yeah, there I'm showing you the passion fruit ink from Fawn. So now these are other pieces to the waving pull tab die. This is the piece that cuts the tab across out of the top. And I have a little bit of trouble getting it to line up. I pull it off. I redo it a couple times. I'm trying to make sure that that bar is really straight and lined up. My tape was losing a little bit of tackiness. So after being reused so many times, I line it back up again. And then I decided I wanted to also tape down those bars to the top. They line up with the top of the card. They don't actually line up on the card itself. They're over the top of it, but I just couldn't get them to stay still. I was afraid when I ran it through my die cut machine I was gonna have it be all crooked. So I really taped that baby down. And then this is the plastic piece that comes in the die, and it helps you line up the tab with the piece that cuts out where the wings will go, and that's what that little rectangular piece is. And I ended up taping that plastic piece down to try to get everything to stay still because I really wanted it lined up nicely. I left that plastic piece the first time around when I ran it through my die cut machine thinking it would make no difference at all, but it actually left a little impression of the plastic piece into my paper. So that was yet another reason why my prototype didn't work really well, and decided to do it again. So now that all those pieces are done, I brought it to my die cut machine, and here is what the finished piece looks like when you're done. And then I think I pull out of my camera just a little bit, and I apologize for that, but there's a hole there, and you put a brad through that hole from the back side, and that hole is cut by the waving pull tab die, so you know perfectly where everything needs to be placed. So here I'm grabbing my little itty bitty brad, and it is a super tiny one. I have trouble opening it, so I pull it off screen and I grab some a piercing tool and opened up that brad a little bit. Or maybe I'd do that here. And then you put the wings on top of that piece, and they also have little holes that you use to feed the brad through. And then open up the prongs on your brad, and you take the piece and you put the wings through those two little holes that the die cuts for you. It's a little finicky, it likes to fold in on me, but I eventually got it to go through both of the holes by bending the wings a little bit, and it didn't matter that I bent them. They looked fine in the end. So that is how it looks on the front. And then you need, I think they only recommend you use one stabilizer piece. You put it right, you butt it up right under those little arms that the die cuts, so you know that you have the perfect spacing. But I was having trouble getting mine to stay straight there in that tab spot, so I actually first I wiggled it around to make sure no glue was sticking anywhere that I didn't want it to glue and inhibiting how the tab went up and down. But I also ended up gluing another stabilizer a little further down. I learned that I needed it when I did my little trial piece. So that is done now, and this is another piece that the die add-on, the waving pull tab add-on cuts, and I cut it in a corresponding pink color to contrast with my peach. It's a little scrap that I had that I thought went well with all the colors in the die set. And then I used foam dots to pop up the owl a little bit away from his wings. Here, I think I couldn't locate my foam dots, foam squares. I always have trouble getting the backs of the foam squares off, so I keep a piercing tool around constantly to help me peel those little squares off the back of the foam dots. So I was happy with that placement. My foam squares were in the right place, and peeled the bottoms off for the stickiness and exposed that on both the ones on the owl and the ones on the base of the card. I was trying to make sure I did not interfere with the wings, so I put those two pieces in the middle. And then glued this down. Now I ended up cutting out somehow a little bit of my video here, so I'm going to explain ahead for a second. I took those strings that I cut with the special delivery add-on set that are going to hold my little balloon conversation hearts, and I was using them to make sure that I had the spacing right. Oh, this part is a little... I put foam on the back of the entire thing so that the pull tab has some room so somebody can grab it from behind when you open the card. But now I will get back to the other part with the strings. I was trying to make sure that I had the spacing right. So I laid the strings out and I was laying the conversation hearts out, and I wanted to make it sure that it looked like the strings were grabbing the top of the bubbles, the balloon bubbles, and the edges of the one balloon, so that it was all looked like it was being grabbed by those strings really nicely. So I laid my spacing out before I glued anything down, and I think you'll see here I have the foam, and you'll see what I was intending was to do that, and then my video cut, and I apologize. So here you can see where I grabbed the strings on that one heart, and at the top of the other two hearts there on those shorter strings on the back, and I glued his hat on, and then I wanted to line up the little punny phrase, "All you need is love," on the front of the card. And on inside I stamped in this amazing card because I think that is hilarious. So I lined it up, excuse my head there. I initially line it up, and then I also used the grid a little bit to straighten it, the grid on the Misty, to make sure it looks all nice and straight to me in the end. And I apologize, this is taking a really long time. There we go. I found a little scrap that I wanted to use to make sure that I thought that all you need is love, I'll spit it out, is straight before I stamp it directly on my card, because I did not want to ruin my card after doing all that work. So all you need is love is there, and it looks, well, I didn't stamp all the way, but it looked nice and straight. The owl part was lined up with the you need is love part, because they are actually separate stamps. So I was happy with how that turned out, and stamped it down on the final card. They seem to have frozen in place. I have no idea why. Okay. My video is a little funny. I'm learning how to do this process, so please pardon any of my goofs. So there we go. There is All You Need is Love is stamped. And I am done with that card. So the second card I do is much simpler. Oh, I forgot I showed you how the wings worked again. I was really happy. I thought it was so cute with those wings flying. So my next card is much simpler. I used all the pieces left over from all my cutting and coloring of the owls and the hat and the letters and everything. And I used the scallop slimline with hearts portrait die, and then the polka heart background portrait die to make some pieces to go behind the hearts that the scallop slimline hearts portrait die cuts. That's a mouthful. So you see me here, I'm taking each piece. I just cut them apart and was making sure the hearts were where I wanted them and straight behind. That was why I used the liquid glue, so I could manipulate it a little bit and move it around. And then I glued all of that down on the scallops piece that die cuts, and then I cut a card base that was just a little bit bigger than that scallop piece. And then I noticed that there was a little piece where I hadn't pulled the die down far enough and my glue had dried too much. So I just kind of made a repair there, and I don't think you can see it in the end result. with a little scrap of peach that I had left over. So this time I didn't use the waving pull tab die, so I just glued a set of wings to the back of the owl and put his hat on, and used the little messenger bag. That was the one I had to cut out with my scissors because I just cannot figure out where that die is. It drives me crazy when I lose something from a stamp set or die set. And then I just kind of moved around where I wanted some of the letters and the openings. And then I used one of the wavy sayings stamps, and this is the fancy banners, I believe. I will double check that and put it in the description below. But is the banner that you fold in and has all the extra little tabs, and I couldn't decide if I wanted to put it up or down, and I decided on putting it up, and then I cut that part out of the screen. I'm sorry, it was a little too zoomed in, but I glued the banners on each side down so that it stayed down, and then put the flying by to say on the outside, and then on the inside, I don't believe I showed this, but I stamped Happy Valentine's Day using another Lawn Fawn set, and I will tell you what that one is too. I can't remember off the top of my head. I will make sure to put all of the sets in the description below that I used. And then I put some foam squares on the back of that banner to put at the top. And that is pretty much the end of my card. And here are a couple pictures so you can see what it finally turned out like in the end. And I hope you enjoyed my cards. Please excuse all my flubs and goofs. I'm learning still, and I appreciate you tuning in. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.